Hello and welcome back to the Shreve Crumpelo YouTube channel. Today we're here for another Collector to Collector with the one and only Jack Tyler.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian.
And Jack, your reputation precedes you.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. But seriously, thank you. It's been such a joy being a part of the YouTube channel and kind of growing that, and the experience to get to handle some really incredible watches and share them with the community. So it's fun to be in this position on the other side of the table, so to speak.
Well, we've been privileged to have you and your passion behind watches featured on our YouTube channel, discussing all sorts of different things regarding watches. Where should we start? Back to the day you originally walked into the shop?
Well, actually, I didn't walk into the shop. I called you. Do you remember this?
I don't. Remind me.
Okay.
How long ago was this?
Oh my goodness. I think it was I probably bought my first real watch, which is a Speedmaster. Not that particular one, but the generation before that. And I called you, and this was probably maybe 5-6 years ago. And you don't remember this. I called you because I said, Brian, I know that you guys are a retailer for Omega, and I was just wondering, like, the case back, is that supposed to be aligned straight up and down on the back of the watch?
This.
And I was like pretending like I hadn't already bought it somewhere else. And you were very kind. You were like, no, that's totally normal. And then I probably made you repeat it like multiple times because I have crippling obsessive compulsive disorder, especially when we're dealing with watches. But eventually I came in and ended up actually getting rid of that Speedmaster and buying one from you. And that's kind of how that relationship started, and it's been quite a journey ever since. But
when the love affair began.
Exactly. Yeah. But the Speedmaster was really my first real watch. Even though I've been wearing watches since I was in middle school, I just didn't really know anything about fine watches until a little later.
So why was the Speedmaster your first nice watch you considered to buy?
Because I couldn't get a sub. I like everybody that starts off with this, you think like I just need one, really nice watch and then I'll be set, right? Like I've gotten to a certain place in my life, like I'm ready to finally own a real watch, and I thought, okay, well, I want something that's going to go with everything, something that's very practical. I want steel. So what's like a really like the most iconic steel black dial watch you can get? It's a sub, right? But I walked into, a Rolex AD, and this was right before the pandemic, and I literally, I think I've told this story on the YouTube channel before. I walked in, I was like, hello, I would like to please buy us a Mariner. Here's my credit card. And they didn't actually laugh at me, but I'm sure that inside that was happening. So I went back to start researching what would be an alternative since I couldn't have gotten the sub. And, the next thing that really kind of comes up on that list for iconic steel sports watches would be the Speedmaster. And I was having this discussion with my wife the other day, talking about how, even though there is a lot of Rolex in my collection, I know we'll get to that, that in a way I'm kind of glad that I wasn't able to just walk in and get what I wanted initially, because it led me down a path of collecting a lot of different watches and experiencing a lot of watches that maybe I wouldn't have experienced if I had been able to just get the Rolexes that I wanted when I first started out. And I've owned everything from a postage stamp size, Louis Cartier to a big Royal Oak, or the Bathyscaphe. Like I've gotten to experience a lot of different watches.
Longa.
For sure, the Longa, and a lot of them were because some of these watches just weren't really obtainable when I first started collecting.
Yep. In addition to being a watch collector and connoisseur, a musician, very accomplished musician.
Oh, wow.
Being a bit of a fashionista and a collector of many unique things. Where do all of these things intersect for you?
Sure. Well, I started my business in restoring vintage saxophones. And, really the finest instruments that are ever made in that particular genre happened, during mid-century in Europe and also in the United States. And working on those saxophones from the 50s and 60s and really seeing the level of craftsmanship that quite honestly doesn't really exist today in our, modern world as consumers, because this is kind of like the last period of time, at least as far as I understand it, where there was such a high emphasis on quality and also sustainability, and there was certainly a whole generation of people that were buying things based on wanting them to last. This is kind of before we got into fast fashion and disposable,
everything
commerce. Yeah, for sure. And fortunately, there are still some little pockets in the world of craftsmen that still make things that are designed to last and be repaired, and be something that you can cherish for forever. And that's kind of what I found with watches, is that it gives you so much in terms of the level of precision of how these things are made, the quality, and you're not just paying for the brand like so many other things these days. So, the intersection between industrial design, fashion, and then craftsmanship and mechanical, interest, it all combines into wristwatches. And I think it's one of the few things, besides maybe, some very high-end automotive, and again, in some menswear, when you get up to a very high level,
Right.
they kind of combine all of those things,
Yeah.
if you know what I mean.
Yeah, so quality crafts.
Yeah, exactly. But design as well, and a lot of these watches obviously could be viewed as maybe a little bit more pedestrian, or not quite as unique as some other people's collections. But I've always had a real fascination for what makes a design iconic, right? We talk about the Porsche 911. We talk about the Rolex GMT Master. I mean, yes, it's obviously spawned a million copycats, and in a way that's kind of watered it down. But when you're looking at the real thing and you have that in your hands, I still think that it's really special. And I think that there's something really fascinating as a case study with anything like that, that why does it continue to reach every new generation as something that's interesting? Like our parents thought that a Submariner was a cool watch to own. We think that you know what I mean. So like
Right.
that I think that that's really something to consider, and it's always fascinating me.
The design and the craft on pick any Rolex out of the catalog has been so carefully pruned over the past, half century that it looks just as iconic as it did when it was from the 1960s as it does today.
For sure.
Very little change to that, and that's an invisible thread that's connecting really all of the high-end things we consider today that were also around 50 years ago.
Exactly. Yeah, all of the heritage brands, and just seeing that there are companies today that have not kind of jumped on the trend of being quick and fashionable, and are kind of sticking to their guns. That's always the stuff that's interested me. But of course, I understand the flip side of the coin, where somebody wants something super unique and one of one, and they want to be the only one in the room with that piece, whether it's a watch or a car or whatever, and that's fine too. But I think they're both sides of the same coin if you really kind of look at it from an objective standpoint.
Right. So a unique colorway on a dial of a watch is red. It's really become sort of, not no pun intended, the redheaded stepchild of the colorway dials. But, they have been prevalent now for the last couple of years across the board from a number of different brands. I see a little red JLC Reverso in
Well,
your
I hate to
watch
correct
box.
you, but I'm gonna go with a Bordeaux as the color of that dial. Yeah. No, that's a watch that never in a million years, in terms of the dial itself, did I think I'd probably pick up and add. But there was something about it. I mean, literally, probably one of the only watches that I've seen in press photos where I was like, oh man, yeah, I really want to check that out, because I've learned, I think, as a lot of us who follow the watch community and are waiting for the new releases, that when you see those photos, they really, no matter how accurate or crisp they are, it's never the same as having it in your hands. And this is just such a unique one, and actually, I think, in many ways, can be styled with a lot of different outfits or looks, and doesn't look totally out of place, even though it is such a different dial color. I had a mentor at one point who was a great collector of many things, and his philosophy was always, if you can, try and experience, everything that's really well known within whatever that collecting world you are. Because the problem is that, we get so wrapped up with what we read and what you should own, and, what we see on Instagram, on people's wrists. And you really don't know if it's going to speak to you until you've owned it for like 6 months, and you go to that case and you end up pulling that watch out organically, and you're not thinking, oh, I haven't worn that one in a while, I guess I should try and like put an outfit together so that I can wear that watch. But you're just grabbing it instinctively, and like I feel like that's kind of where my collection is going. Owning a Reverso, I think that anybody who's been collecting watches for a long time is probably going to have a Reverso at some point in their collection. And that was part of the reason that I wanted to own this watch because, obviously this is such an iconic design.
Truly.
But it has become a favorite, and it has become a watch that I wear and grab, with outfits that I wouldn't expect. Like, again, this could go with a t-shirt and jeans. This could go with a
Easily.
suit. I love putting it on different straps that you might not expect. And yeah, it's.
I love that strap. What is that?
Thank you. I think that's a lizard.
Very nice.
Yeah. But yeah, it's such a cool watch. So yeah, I'm privileged to have it.
And this is the 1931 case?
I think so. Yeah, the tribute.
The tribute model.
Yeah, which is the single monoface and the plain back, which
Beautiful.
also could be engraved with something cool. So lots of opportunities for customization for sure.
For case back engravings.
There you go.
Yeah, one of my first watches was actually the 1931 tribute.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And one of my biggest regret watches.
Let's get
selling
rid of
that
that one. Now that one's the black dial, right?
That was the black dial.
That's
Yes.
so cool. Yeah.
Black dial with the
sword
old,
hands, right?
with the sword hands with the old Reverso font on the dial.
Oh, that's a bummer.
Yeah.
Well, if anybody can find another one.
Likely me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So going back to that, you have been through a number of different watches that have been in and out of your collection. Is there
Yeah.
one that is not in your collection currently that we see here that you miss or would buy back or maybe buy in a different iteration of a metal or dial?
Yeah, for sure. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I mean, I really do sometimes I miss that Longa. I would love to have a Longa one in yellow gold.
That was along a 101.027.
Oh my goodness, yeah, exactly. The white gold one. That was a cool watch. And actually, there was a Zenith El Primero, the one that had all the blue subdials.
The manufacturer edition.
The manufacturer edition. That was a really cool watch that sometimes I regret. But I think we all have those. You do.
I think everyone out there has those stories.
Yeah,
you know.
anytime you sell something.
There are plenty of watches that I've sold that I deeply regret
What's
at this moment.
What's at the very top?
Probably my line sport titanium mono pusher.
Yeah, I remember when you got that.
I bought and sold in like June of 2021,
Oh, wow.
right before the Journe market went like a full hockey stick.
Yeah.
And I don't prefer to think about it anymore.
It's okay. There'll be time for another one, I'm sure.
So outside of Rolex in your collection, we have a couple non-Rolex models in the box, specifically the Cartier Jaeger Vacheron. Why don't you talk about one of those?
Sure. Well, I think the very first video that we did for Shreve was about the American Driver, the 1921. And
Fun video.
yeah, that was a blast. And hopefully, maybe brought some people to this watch that wouldn't have picked it out of the case before, because it is obviously you look at these watches and in many ways, like we said, you've seen them all before, but this is something that, you maybe would not expect in this collection.
Right.
And
I've had many people, by the way, comment on that video.
oh yeah.
About how much they enjoyed learning about the history
It's
of the
great.
1921.
Well, see, that's the other thing is really, maybe save the OP and the date just. Each one of these watches does have, kind of a unique place in history, right? The GMT Master being the watch designed for Pan American pilots. Obviously, the Speedmaster speaks for itself. I think in many ways, the Cartier is probably the most interesting historical watch in the collection, which we can talk about in a little bit. But this has got such a cool story too. And I think that that's what adds to the depth of any watch that you end up owning. And I really try, or not try, but I find myself purchasing watches that have a place in history, a place in time. Again, whether it's fictional, it's in a movie or it's on a television show, or something like this, which, what do we like trace this back to?
James Ward Packard.
James Ward Packard, right, who potentially commissioned this watch. But yeah.
I don't know if it's potentially. I think that is the story that Vacheron's holding too.
Yeah, they should. It's a great story, and it's a beautiful watch, and it's a nice conversation starter. I did mean to talk to you about this, and I hate to do it on camera, but I was hoping that maybe we could ask. I've always wondered, I feel like the dial might be a little bit off on this one. If we could maybe send it back to
I'll send it to Vacheron for service.
I don't know, I hate to complain.
They can straighten it out.
That's a joke.
Well, we currently, when looking at your collection, have a lot of Rolex. Okay. how do you go from saying, I'm going to buy one sub to then adding, you know, 5 additional pieces?
Yeah, actually, the first Rolex I got wasn't the Submariner. That took a little bit longer than I thought. It's actually that Oyster Perpetual, the white dial 39, which sadly only had a couple-year run. And I was really fortunate to get it at a boutique. It had come in for someone who decided that they thought the white looked too silver for some reason. So I was able to get it.
Very
And
likely story.
it's kind of funny because I feel like I own both like the most undercover Rolex ever, and then like the most over the top. Well, maybe not the most over the top, but in terms of models, like a yellow gold day date. And I love them both. I mean, there's a simplicity to this watch that flies under the radar, and I have never worn it on the original bracelet. As soon as I got it home, I put it on a leather strap because I thought this was just something that could go with almost anything, and go anywhere. And yeah, I'm lucky to have it.
It's on a beautiful brown suede strap.
Yeah,
Now.
I think it's cool. But yeah, I think at some point you just have to really ask what's going to make you happy when you put that watch on your wrist. Because apart from being in a boutique or being at a watch meetup, I mean, I've literally never had anybody come up to me, even wearing something that, we would perceive as kind of audacious, like a solid yellow gold Rolex, and ask about your watch. At the end of the day, we should do this for ourselves. And that's the only way that you're really going to enjoy it. And I guess I've just ended up here, and these are the watches that make me happy. And kind of like I said earlier, I still love kind of delving into the design and the history of each one of these pieces, especially the Rolexes, because again, I think the design language is so classic and iconic, and I want to figure out what that is, since I design products as well, obviously for my business, and I've learned a lot. Not that I could ever compare myself to any of these brands, but both in terms of the marketing and the design language, I think that there's a lot of lessons to be learned. And many people might call some of these watches ubiquitous, but I would always say that, things are classic for a reason. There's a reason that there's a million copies of a GMT out there, or a day date. And I think that there's something very fascinating about that.
Yeah. And the design language across the entire Rolex catalog is overlapping quite a bit. I mean, you have a Jubilee bracelet on a Pepsi GMT. You have a Jubilee bracelet on a regular Datejust. You have a fluted bezel on your Datejust, just as you would have a gold fluted bezel on the day date. So, there's an overarching continuity to that design, which I think that, makes the brand even more identifiable.
Yeah, for sure.
On a grander scale.
Yeah.
We have the gold day date.
Yes.
Most people would consider this, in any normal world, I've made it watch. Right?
Sure.
Is that, for you, the case?
I guess a little bit. I think that I got that watch for right around my 35th birthday. And that was also kind of a pivotal moment for my business, where I've been very fortunate to kind of get to, take a little bit more of a backseat than I ever thought I would, especially having, an independent small business. I think it's fairly rare to be able to, step away and kind of let it run itself a little bit more. And so this watch kind of represented that, and it's very aspirational. But also, for me, I have a real love for, mid-century modern furniture, design, clothing, and this watch to me, though I think maybe a lot of people might associate this with the 80s. I think, especially in this particular size, it's just, there's something about, the guy going to the office in the 60s wearing his yellow gold watch that, I mean, there's a romantic, image there, but, I think we're all kind of living in a movie in our minds in some ways. And this is what this watch does for me, for sure. Yeah.
Who do you associate in pop culture more with this piece?
Oh.
Would you say it's perhaps a past president, or would you say it's perhaps
Tony Soprano?
Tony Soprano.
Yeah, for sure. 1,000%. I mean, I've always been inspired by, movies and TV and books, and, a lot of these watches hold a place either on the silver screen or in history. And like, certainly that was a show that had a big impact on me.
What do you love most about watch collecting?
Oh my goodness. Just getting to be on YouTube with you, Brian. That's all been leading up to this.
Oh, Gosh.
Anyways, what do I love most about watch collecting? I mean, I think kind of parallel to what I said earlier, it is really, I think, just as much about, this is so cheesy, but the journey and not just the destination, right?
Mm,
I mean, a lot of these pieces have taken years to acquire, and I think that again, if you're able to just get everything that you want right away, it kind of takes the magic out of it.
right.
Another thing for me is a lot of people that know me really well. I mean, I collect vintage guitars, vintage records, vintage furniture, vintage clothes. I've had a lot of people ask me, why don't you have any vintage watches?
Great.
And for me, I love that each one of these pieces is starting to not only develop its own unique patina, but also now I have memories specifically tied to a lot of these pieces. I've never traveled over the last 5 years without that GMT. So that GMT has been all over the world with me. And I kind of like the idea of, making my own history with each one of these pieces, even though I really do have a love for vintage design, and there's a lot of vintage watches that I actually think are in many ways more interesting in an aesthetics perspective. But I've really enjoyed having these, and I'm really trying to kind of pare it down a little bit so that I do have those memories, and I can tell you every unfortunate scratch that I have on every watch, what happened and where I was, if I was working on a horn or if I was again out on vacation or driving,
Hmm.
and I think that there's something kind of special about that.
So would you ever get one of your Rolexes engraved with like something meaningful?
I've thought about it. I just haven't thought of anything good enough. But yeah, I think that's a really cool thing, and I think that's special, obviously, about having the solid case back, which is actually becoming more and more of a rarity these
Yeah,
days.
that's right. That's
So
right.
yeah, I'll think of something good. Don't worry.
Thank you all for joining us for our latest Collector to Collector. If you're enjoying our content, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you'd like to check out any of the watches we currently have available, head over to www.shrevekrumpenlow.com. If you would like to be featured on our Collector to Collector, please send an email to sales@shrevekrumpenlow.com. Subject line, Collector to Collector.